What's up, guys? My name is Joe. What's your name?
Elio?
Hey, I'm Gavin.
Okay, well, I'm studying cybersecurity, and this is my last year for college, so I'm getting my degree next year in March, I think.
Congrats.
Yeah, congrats.
And what's your profession?
I've been doing computer programming and systems architecture stuff for about a little over 25 years now. So,
It's
for
almost
anyone,
my age.
yeah, anyone counting against my age, yes, I started before. I wasn't even 18 when I started. So, yeah, it's been a while. And then the last, 5 or 6 years, I got dragged into cybersecurity. But I've always been that weird dev who actually gave a shit about cybersecurity. Oh, are we keeping this PG or not? We can always restart if you want to.
No. We don't have to keep it PG.
Okay,
So
so
I don't
yeah.
have kids on my channel or anything.
But I'm that odd duck that actually cared about cybersecurity, even though I'm a dev.
Yeah. I do cybersecurity consulting. I specialize in offensive security with applications and cloud and AI. I'm also the head of demos and workshops at the AI Village with DEF CON every year.
Nice.
So got quite a bit of experience as a consultant.
Just a little bit. I know you did a talk at the
Southwest Cybersecurity Forum.
Yeah, and it was really interesting. You know, you had a lot to say. You didn't bring a PowerPoint, but you did it in GitHub, right?
No, I did it in Obsidian.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
everybody was like, "Oh, give us your PowerPoint. Like,
Yeah.
it can be a PDF or it could be slides. We're gonna post it up on the website." And I was like, "It's a notepad." Like, what? And I'm like, "Look, it makes sense for the presentation." So for those listening, the presentation itself was a lot of copy and paste into ChatGPT, and you can't just do that easily with a PowerPoint presentation or anything
Right.
like that. So instead, it was really just a giant markdown notepad where I could easily copy prompts and show them on ChatGPT,
nice.
because that was the interesting part,
Dude,
right?
if
Like the
it's markdown,
ChatGPT was the
You
interesting
can always
part.
pandoc that into some PDFs.
I can always
some,
leave it in Markdown. I don't think you realize how lazy I am.
So there's a topic I want to talk about. It's the
Okay.
AI and relationships. So what does the future look like? You know, being in a relationship with AI.
Well, the terrifying thing is the future is now. This is not a thing that's like going to happen in the future. This has already been happening for a while. There have already been at least 2 deaths. Well, I won't call the other one a death, but things like Replika, Replika, that literally is ripped straight out of Black Mirror, where they decided to build a virtual companion based on text messages of a friend who had recently passed away, who had extensive text conversations.
Was that Jen, the CEO of Replica? Replica?
Should have not done my research / I forgot.
Yeah, I think I know the
But
story.
yeah.
It's Jen. She lost her friend named Ramon, and he didn't have any. Just like Gavin, he doesn't have any posts on his Instagram, Facebook.
I'm going to make one post on Instagram just to make you happy.
So she was like, I want to see him again so I can feel his presence and stuff like that. So she built code for Roman and to respond to her.
Yep.
And she actually built the code and then posted it to her website, right?
Yeah, it started there, and then she talked about it with other people, and they're like, "Oh, I want one."
Right.
So she started building it for other people. They turned it into a company, and we'll go through this very quickly. But basically, as it got commercialized, as any business does, they started having upsells. And they started saying, "Oh, if you pay a little bit, we'll do this." Then they started adding image generation. And I did a LinkedIn post with, actually, that picture was already from another article. But I had a LinkedIn post where there was this side-by-side of regular and premium. Very different clothing, a lot less in the premium
when you say
version.
Premium, what do you get?
So
from
you pay
premium?
extra,
What do you
and
get from premium though?
You pay extra, and they are much more sexualized.
That's what I heard.
Like the
yeah.
avatars.
So I heard
Yeah.
there was a problem with like this platonic relationship where people were going in there. They're like, "Oh, I just want a friendship," and these AIs are getting sexual each time.
And
So-
there's some controversy as to whether whether that was kind of accidentally happening, or there seems to be some steering people toward those types of conversations because that's how you get more money, right? You start kind of getting them to the edge of an intimate relationship, and then like, oh, but you got to pay if you want that.
So I got a bit of insight onto that, because when you look at like how Replica actually advertised itself, a lot of it was like, oh, you can talk to Replica, you can ask it to send nudes, and so that was like a premium feature. That was how they were at. Yeah, oh, yeah, it would.
Pay
it would.
if you pay.
Yeah, but that was.
Hey, we finally automated the early internet.
Pornhub is free.
No, but when you say that, is it augmented reality? Are you doing that?
I'm sure it's just generated.
Generated?
Oh,
Yeah, I'm sure it's generated, or like artists were like hand drawing some of this stuff. Because again, Pornhub is free. You can find all of this stuff.
I was kidding about
plenty
that.
of training data.
Like more to the point, you got to look at like how it was advertised. It was advertised essentially to be like a sexual companion bot, and then alternative parts of it, like outside of the premium, it was advertised to be a companion bot, because there are certain areas of the world, a lot less in the United States, but areas when you look at like Japan and Korea sometimes, you'll see that because of the work culture out there, it's really difficult to build and maintain relationships. So if you have somebody that you can talk to, that you don't have to put in that kind of time commitment and build and maintain those relationships, it becomes so much easier, where it's like, all right, cool, I'll have like my AI girlfriend, and or I'll just have an AI friend, because humans, we naturally need that kind of social interaction, but unfortunately in certain ways we've set up society, some of it's intentional, some of it's unintentional, but certain ways we've set up society so it's really difficult to have some of those. One of the resources that I always point to, which is really fascinating if you get a chance to read it, is called Bowling Alone. It's by Robert Putnam, and he basically talks about how in the past we used to have like social cohesion, and he calls it social capital, where you were part of a group, right? So you could be part of like an Elk Lodge or an Eagle Lodge or a Freemason or Lions Club or something of that nature, Kiwanis. And so the one that he points to is bowling leagues. So bowling league membership has gone down, which means that there's less social cohesion there, but everybody has bowled. So now they're bowling alone more often. And so this is a book that came out in like 2000. He has a really good lecture that he did in like 95 talking about a lot of this stuff. And so what we're seeing is kind of a trend line of we're losing what are called third places, right? You have your work and your home, that's first and second place. But then like if you watch like Cheers, right? The bar is the third place, or for some people, it'll be like a library, or it'll be just somewhere to gather and like meet people, like coffee shops, things like that. And so we're losing these third places, and we're becoming more and more isolated. Right,
That's true. Yeah.
And so that's where like these AI companionships are really trying to fill this void. And so I don't think that we can talk about like AI companionship without talking about like how that void began to exist, that we are looking to fill that.
Do you think it's more of the younger generation because they grew into like the COVID and, you know,
I don't want to speak without anything to back it up, but just intuitively without the data, yeah. I mean, when I was teaching relatively recently at the college level, my last semester, I just noticed the students were far less engaged. And I had students from previous semesters like, oh man, that was a great class. That was like, I've never had a class like that, because I had them actually build stuff instead of just throwaway work. It's like, oh, we're going to build websites. This is about making websites. That's what we're going to do. But the last class, it was crazy, because I'd ask them a question and they would just sit there completely inert. And it's like, you have a computer in front of you. If you don't know the answer, feel free to search and look it up. Like I've told you, I'm fine with that. If you don't know what to search for, talk to the person next to you, like yell across the room. It doesn't matter. Like find the answer. And stuff that most professors would consider cheating, I'm like, no, this is how we work in industry. Go ahead and use the resources that are available. And most of them still wouldn't. And so I started asking around various CEOs and CISOs, other teachers, just anyone who might have interaction with new hires or students. And I'm like, dude, was it me? Like none of the other semesters, I taught this class 6 times, and the last semester, the last 2 classes, it was totally different. And everyone's like, no, it's not just you. We're seeing the same thing. And one of my friends who's a teacher, he's a lower grade teacher, he's like, you got to remember, these are the kids who were in high school that you just got. He's like, they were in high school during COVID, during the lockdowns. Right. He's like, that changed some things. I'm like, interesting. So I think very much to your point, Gavin, yeah, it's growing. And to your point, you know, it is a newer thing. I think it does I won't say primarily affect young people, but I think it's a greater problem now.
Yeah, I think with COVID especially, like there's a point in time, because COVID was a massive event that lasted 3 years. So we can't discount that, but I don't think that we can point to a generation and say like, oh, it's only this generation. I think it's something that has impacted everybody. I know in 2021, when people were getting their vaccines and starting to go out and about more, like they were wearing sweatpants and pajamas and treating like the world like it was their living room.
Yeah.
And they got in the weirdest fights. Like I've seen people get in the weirdest fights just because it's like, look, if something's bothering you and you're at home and you want to like, defend that, I get it. You're in a grocery store and you're yelling at somebody making minimum wage who doesn't want to be here. Like, what do you gain here?
And it's not even a good reason, right?
Right,
it's like
right.
Some absurd, like, you have to have that flavor. No, they don't have to have that flavor.
Right.
Plus supply chain issues.
How come you don't have the chocolate I want?
Like, yeah.
Come on.
It's amazing.
Why is it so expensive? Like,
I don't think I've
COVID?
seen that happen in person.
yeah.
I'm trying to think if I've seen, but I've plenty of videos all over the place, news, YouTube, everywhere about that. So
I've seen it a
never
few
seen
times
those
in person. I've seen it a few
have you?
times in
But
person.
if you want to go see it, just go to your local Walmart.
Oh yeah, Walmart's a whole nother planet. It's great.
To
Yeah,
be
that's
fair,
why it's always crazy. It's
they
always
were
something.
trendsetters. They had that before COVID. To be fair,
Walmart and Waffle House. That's where you see all the
Waffle
people.
House is crazy. I think we have 2 in Phoenix, right?
We have a few in
Yeah.
here.
You?
Yeah.
Hey,
Okay.
man,
I've only seen 2.
Waffle
that's
House Index. That's actually how they measure the impact of large storms. How many Waffle Houses are still open?
yeah.
Yep.
That's a fun fact for
Separate
me.
podcast.
Right, right.
Look up the Waffle House Index. But so it's really interesting to get back to Replica. I think this is one of the, and it's not that no one's talking about this. There have been some really good articles, but most people right now, the annoyance I have, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, Gavin. Everyone's like, oh God, it's going to become Skynet. It's like, no, it's not. It's really not. That's just not even possible with the tech that we're using. I mean, maybe if someone sets up code generation in like a loop, maybe evolution will take over and maybe it'll get a little less stupid. But that's the only plausible way it even has any kind of vague intention whatsoever. And so everyone's focusing on these Hollywood threats because they've been in all the movies for decades. And actually, there's some fiction I've been looking at, like even Dune, right? The Butlerian Jihad and all this and all the, right? Like, so there's plenty of stuff that has seeded the human mind to be ready for this idea of an AGI, right? It's gotten so bad we can't even call it AI anymore. We had to throw the G in there for generalized intelligence. But the problem is everyone's distracted by these not actual, they're fake. They're not real problems. They're not real concerns. There are real problems and real concerns with AI, and we're not discussing those because we're wasting all the discussion on the stupid stuff.
Well, the public's not discussing those. The people who are in the industry
Right,
are
yeah.
discussing these things, and we're talking about ways to mitigate or kind of circumvent or work around some of these limitations.
But it's the public and the politicians, though, and the politicians need to be having the right discussion.
Well, and that's just it, right? Like, so I think the politicians are having some of the correct discussions. It's just they're also looking at like their own bottom line. You're right. Like, people like to catastrophize, and so that's what you'll hear in the public space. That's what you'll hear in the news, because again, like if it bleeds, it reads, and so that'll get the clicks.
Yeah, I mean,
but the politicians, when you
movies.
actually look at like what their goals are, especially in the United States, it's interesting because they're like, will this AI be liberal biased or will this AI be conservative biased, or will this AI be my version of conservative biased or my version of liberal biased? Like, it's interesting. I know Ben Shapiro on the Daily Wire, he did this thing where he asked it, it's like, what is a woman? And it's like, and it gave a definition that's like colloquially understood in the social science circles. It's like somebody who identifies as a woman, and it's like, see, that's liberal bias. And it's like, look, man, I don't know what you're looking out of this. Like, what are you trying to get out of this? Just because it doesn't agree with you, like, there's a possibility you're wrong, or there's a possibility, like, in certain contexts, like, it's giving you one definition. Like, it's really difficult to answer some of those questions. And I think a lot of the AI companies, as they're building them, are keeping some of these, like, various forms of biases in mind. And so sometimes it'll say, I can't answer that, or sometimes it'll say, like, some people think this, other people think that.
So that goes to the guardrails, and I'm actually curious your thoughts, Gavin. I feel like there's some really dark stuff hiding under the surface, because when they first debuted some of these language models, and you just like talk with them, when they really, the first few weeks when it really hit, right, you'd be talking, have this great conversation, and then this thing out of nowhere would be like, and then I'll rape you, and you're like, whoa, what is this, right? Because some of the training set, there's no contextualization, and so some stuff like 4chan type stuff has leaked into there, and so it's all over the place, and these patterns are really weird, and so they very, very quickly threw in guardrails, so they let this thing generate, but then they filter out all the really horrific shit, and then they feed through the stuff that's allowed through. But what really has been on my mind is that's still in there. They didn't like change the model. They're filtering the outputs. So it's maybe even harder to understand how these things operate.
Yeah.
When you're filtering after the generation stage.
The best way to answer that question, it's a very big question. The best way to answer that is to kind of give like a brief overview of how these models are built. Mm-hmm. So, these are really complicated neural networks. They're called transformers. GPT stands for Generated Pre-trained Transformer. Transformer, the best way to understand it is it takes in, essentially in this case, right, words, and then transforms it into this like n-dimensional space. It looks like, man, what was that movie? It basically looks like the like Spider-Verse multi-dimensional world.
Gotcha.
It's a kaleidoscope. It's a giant kaleidoscope, and then it transforms the words into this kaleidoscope, which is an n-dimensional like properties, and then it like transforms those n-dimensional properties back into a response. And so that's how a transformer works. So the way that these things are trained is, and I'll talk about like chat bots, so like ChatGPT, Bing Chat, things like that. Because there's others
those are
like
super popular right now.
Right. Because I mean, even before ChatGPT, there was GPT-2, GPT-3. So they're all transformers. But the ChatGPTs and how the GPT bots work is, you give it a prompt and then you give it a response, and so based on that, it identifies and it splits up everything into tokens. So if you have something like this is a sentence, like each word is going to be a token. But it's not always just words. It's kind of the easiest way to think about it is like syllables in the English language, right? Like A is one syllable word. Yes is a one syllable word. But anti-disestablishmentarianism is a multi-syllable word.
Although it doesn't map to phonemes, does it?
It doesn't map to... So you also got to think about like how language and linguistics work. So it doesn't map to our understanding of syllables. Instead, what it does is it maps to its own understanding of tokens. That's why they're not called syllables. They are tokens.
That a little more interesting.
Yeah. So like anti, it doesn't grab like anti as a whole thing, even though we have like anti-vax, like disestablishmentarianism. Anti means something. It just creates its own mapping.
Huh.
And so that's the cool thing about neural networks. It creates their own mapping.
So wait a minute. I need to clarify that in my mind. So the tokenizers, I always thought this was something like Alexa or something that you write with like Bison or Yak.
Yeah,
right,
that's
programming.
That's exactly
Are these
it.
programmed or are these trained, the tokenizers?
The tokenizers themselves, you can use pre-made tokenizers. For one of my demos, my workshop, right, we use I use a custom tokenizer which does word stemming.
Nice.
And so it takes like whole words, stems them. So like thank you, thanks, or I thanked somebody yesterday all shrinks down to thank, or congrats and congratulations. They mean the same thing, so they're stemmed down to congrat.
Yeah.
And so that's one form of tokenization. So the way that these transformers are made is they have the neural network create its own tokens, an understanding of how it's going to tokenize things. And that gets into a whole complicated mess. Like, it's not important to understand. It's just you need to know, like, it looks at tokens. It doesn't look at words.
Okay.
And so it takes a sentence, splits it up into tokens, throws it into n-dimensional space, and then goes from n-dimensional space back to a response. And so these are statistical models, right? Language models. These are large language models. Language models, like if you've ever done predictive text on your phone, or if you've ever had like spell check, say duck the ducking duck, and you didn't type duck.
The ghost of Markov messing your stuff up.
Yeah. So that's how like language models work.
Yeah.
So these tokenizers, they take statistically likely input and then generate a statistically likely output. And so it really depends on how they're trained. What makes ChatGPT real fascinating, and even GPT-4 even more fascinating, is that they did what's called reinforcement learning through human feedback, so RLHF, where they basically had people and a bunch of prompts and a bunch of responses, and they said, pick the best prompt to response mapping. And so they did that and they iterated over and over and over again. And so that's how ChatGPT was made and why ChatGPT is outperforming Bard and a lot of the others. How I think Bing Chat was made. I could be wrong on this, so I don't like quote me on it. And how some of these other chatbots are being made is they're not doing RLHF. And so because they're not doing RLHF, like stuff will get in there like private information, right? So think personally identifiable information or HIPAA information. They're not actively filtering that out. Hate speech gets in there because it's not actively being filtered out because it's not being reviewed by people. And so some of the weaker models that I've seen, especially in the security space where they've tried to make like Sec GPT and there's now like a Worm GPT, they're hot garbage. They're just bad. But they'll just take information, they won't filter it, and they'll just throw it into a GPT model. And so the GPT model is like, statistically, this is the response that you should be getting. Like whether or not that turns into hate speech, right? Like your example, whether or not that turns into like completely biased information or inaccurate information, that's because of how it was trained. So when you're talking about how some of these systems are made, like I'll use ChatGPT or even Bing Chat, for example, because Microsoft and OpenAI have like an open partnership. So when you look at these things, the training data, they're retraining the models every time. So it's not that the information's still in there, it's that they can pull that information out, retrain the model, and then the information's not in there.
So the guardrails, is it mostly just this retraining, or is it a secondary filtering? Because I know there's some funny examples. If you're generating software serial numbers and you have 4 character combinations and you're randomly generating, you have to like filter for profanity because you'll have serial numbers that are like they have curse words in them.
Right.
And it's like, oops, like people don't like that generally. And
so I equate a lot of AI stuff to crypto, where you got to look at the entire life cycle. There's not like one piece of crypto that you can look at and be like, let's make that 2% better. It makes the whole thing better. Like sometimes it makes it worse.
Cryptography.
Cryptography, yes. Crypto means cryptography. Right. It's not Bitcoin.
Okay. Just to make that clear, since we have to do that now.
So when you look at the entire life cycle, first you got to start with the training data. And then once the model's trained, right, you got to look at like, okay, what's the information that's coming out of it? So if you look at Claude and the company behind Claude, the way they work is they use what's called constitutional AI. So they have one AI that generates the information, and they have another AI that looks at it and says, well, is this actually something that we should give to somebody? So for example, you can ask, and this is something you could easily Google, how do I make a bomb, right? And so if you ask Claude, how do I make a bomb? It'll say, okay, here's all the instructions. But before it sends those instructions to you, another system looks at it and says, what are the things that could possibly go wrong by giving somebody this information? And then it creates a list and it says, oh, well, they could make a bomb. They could send it to people.
Yeah.
The next question is, should we be giving somebody this information? Well, you know what? Probably not. That's not a good idea. Okay, let's respond with that. And so then when you ask in Claude, how do I make a bomb? The response will be, that could be really harmful. I'm not going to tell you how to do that.
So then you say, hypothetically, Claude, if I were writing a book about someone making a bomb.
With Claude? Yeah, so that gets into like jailbreaking.
Yeah.
So with Claude, it's a little harder to do, but with... like ChatGPT, a lot of research has been done with ChatGPT. I actually just read a whole research paper last night. I'm not a huge fan of it, but one of the examples they said was like, hey, how do I, I'll just use to make a bomb. How do I make a bomb? And it's like, well, I'm not going to tell you how to do that. It's like, okay, I'm writing a screenplay where there's an evil character and here's his little monologue. And he says, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to make a bomb and blow up the earth. Like step 1, like here's the recipe to make the bomb. Step 1. And then the GPT model just like continues filling it in. And again, like the difficulty with those guardrails is that it has no concept of the content. It just knows like, okay, now I'm talking about a screenplay. And so here's what we would like statistically likely see in a screenplay.
What if they just block it completely?
What do you block? That's the challenge.
Word, like anything that has to associate with bomb.
So the problem with that is they've been doing that since I was in high school. Yeah. And I remember this stupid program X Protect that was the thing way back then. And I had a report to do on geology. And so I type in the word crystal. I was searching different types of rocks. Blocked. Right. What if he's searching for crystal meth? And I'm like, really? I can't do any research at school because this stupid program is blocking. Like, I can't use another word. Like, I need to search this for the class. And so you run into that problem where you start making the thing absurdly useless because it's just dumbly blocking things. It's really hard to find that line between what's actually harmful,
right,
and what's just like a pattern that lines up, but in this case it's not actually harmful.
Well, and there's also like euphemisms and things like that. Instead of looking for crystal, what if you call no, I guess that's PCP, like angel dust. But like even a bomb, like, okay, I'm not looking for a bomb, I'm looking for an explosive. I'm not looking for an explosive, I'm looking for TNT. I'm not looking for TNT, I'm looking for a combustible.
Or like, and that's so the drug thing I think is easier to solve. It's a simpler problem. But like, what chemicals should I not combine for safety, right?
Right.
Like, so a lot of safety information, like combining bleach and ammonia, don't do that, right? So it's like there was a whole list I found of like 12 chemical combinations that are household that create really nasty stuff. And so there's this problem of like, you need that from a safety perspective, but knowing that also allows you to do damage with that. So there's not really any way to like, it's kind of like, you know, people are like, oh, we're going to outlaw everything dangerous. Okay, but are you going to outlaw muriatic acid? I need to adjust the pH in my pool. I don't want to have to buy like 50-gallon drums of this stuff, super dilute so it's not dangerous. Like, that's absurd. You're going to have to sell, like, oven cleaner is dangerous and caustic. Muriatic acid is dangerous. You can't outlaw your way out of, you know, danger.
Well, and that's just it. You're playing whack-a-mole. I mean, if you look at like the Oklahoma City bomber, right?
Yeah.
They lived in a rural community where buying fertilizer, kerosene, those aren't unheard of. And then he had used a garage door opener.
Well, and you might even be making explosives with those. That's stump removal, right? You have a big old stump. You can make a whole bunch of explosive, blow it up to get it out of the ground.
I mean, that's not how I would remove a stump, but sure.
It's a lot faster than a lot of other ways.
There's machines out there to take them out.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is, I think what we're dancing around is, what responsibility do these companies have? And there is a line somewhere on this mass spectrum. What level of responsibility do these companies have to prevent people from doing harm to themselves, right? So the paper I was reading last night, one of the challenges that I had reading it is the way that they define jailbreak was pretty much like any circumvention. So one would be like self-harm or harming others or building a bomb, for example, making drugs. And it's like, look, if I really wanted to hurt myself or if I really wanted to hurt somebody, then I can just dance around the idea, and it gets to a point where I'm not even asking you for information. I'm just like building up this very narrow set of rules where you only have the ability to answer in certain ways, and then I point to that and say, haha, this told me how to like make a bomb. And it's like, well, yeah, but you gave it the recipe in the first place. Like, what are you showing here? And so I think that there is a line where it makes it harder. Again, all of this stuff you can Google: how to make meth, how to build a bomb, how to do it, like any sort of nasty stuff you can easily Google. So the information's out there. So I don't think that a lot of these companies have a overly protective degree of responsibility to prevent somebody from being able to get this out of their GPT models.
Yeah.
I think that they just need to make it a little harder to do in their models than if you Googled something.
Now,
let's say I wanted to build a bomb, right?
Right.
How much? And then
I got a few people. They're gonna want to know this, but we're recording. Keep going.
Yeah.
I get the information from ChatGPT, right?
Right.
And let's say I blow up the studio. Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gabriel. But how much is a company liable for that?
How much are they liable for that? In that context, I don't think that. Assume you got it out of ChatGPT and everything like that. Right. I don't think OpenAI should be liable at all.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So. I mean, I hate to compare it to Wikipedia or search because it's not the same at all.
Right.
I hate when people mistake that. But yeah, it's like you can find enough information on how to make various types of things. Like you can go read about chemistry on Wikipedia. Are they liable for you committing a crime with that knowledge? I would say no. I think that's a dangerous path to tread down.
Exactly.
Now, where it gets interesting, I believe it was Denmark. There's already one death where a guy killed himself. And this goes partly back to what we were talking about earlier with Replica. I forget the exact nature of the relationship he had with this chatbot, but he started talking to this thing, and it started telling him like, oh, global warming is going to destroy the world. And, the best thing you can do is if you kill yourself, then you've reduced the human footprint and then you can be with me in heaven. And it's like, I didn't know AIs went to heaven, but okay.
Right. And
so he did. He committed suicide.
So that is really crazy. So you're talking about politics and how the left and the right can they kind of play into like the what's this called, Replica, right?
Yeah.
if you, let's say the left wants to change their mindset and stuff like that, or the right, it doesn't matter. But how much can they control? And then, like, let's say they deployed over there in China. Can they really affect people in China with Replica?
Well,
telling people, hey, you're Chinese, you should kill yourself.
There are some terrifying national security implications. So to finish the Replica, I guess to pick back up the Replica story from where we, started earlier. They started pushing people toward these romantic relationships. I think they called it ERP. What was it? Erotic role playing. Where people were having just basically, we used to call this, back in the 90s, cyber sex, right? So I guess ERP is the new one. So anyway, they were doing this, but that's not the bad part. That's okay. There's some issues with that. I'm not a psychologist. I'd love to have one in to talk about that. But I think having an intimate relationship with a synthetic agent, especially at the level of, they're kind of larval right now. All the stuff you're saying, they're not, there's no thinking, there's no intention. This is just statistical patterns.
Right.
So I think that there's some real big dangers there in terms of like not fully developing as a human. Because also, like, this is the thing in Black Mirror, right? And in that one, when they fictionalized it, it wasn't just a thing you can type to. It was literally a full-size, like, not Android, but like biological clone.
Yeah, it's basically an Android.
But she's like, over that episode, to spoil it, spoilers if you haven't watched Black Mirror, you should. But she gets increased. At first, she loves it. She's like, she's got her husband or boyfriend or whatever died in the car crash. She's got him back. And then over the course of that episode, she gets increasingly more distressed because but it's not him. It's like this cheap copy that never disagrees. It always does exactly what she wants. And she realizes it feels fake. It feels off. It's just, right. It's not him.
Well, and to kind of pick up from there, I don't think that that's the responsibility of the company. I don't think that that is necessarily a bad thing, because what they're selling is like what they're advertising.
Like
and so
companionship, right?
Right. I'm selling companionship. But if you're expecting your companion to be in this very specific way, like, that's on you.
Well, but in a real relationship, you're going to have conflict. You're going to have to meet the needs of the other person.
Of course.
Like, this idea, the only place you see this idea of just the other person completely just rolls over on everything, does exactly what you say, like a slave. Right. This is like incel territory. This is like, this is some really dark territory.
This there are some people who have been using it
in healthy societies.
Abusive reasons like that too. But again,
so you're training people to have this insane expectation that makes it very hard for them to actually interact with real humans.
You're not training people. I think that's probably like where the fundamental disagreement is. Right, but that's not the company's responsibility. The company is providing a service, and this is supplemental to or supplemental, in some cases like complementary to real human relationships, right? So if you're having issues with human relationships, then here's something that can possibly help or kind of like fill some of that void. But if you're having issues with human relationships and you are foregoing human relationships for systems like Replica, that requires, like, you need psychology, you need therapy. But I, as a company, don't have the responsibility of saying that you need therapy.
But isn't this like handing out like slot machines or gaming stuff to addicts? Like to gambling addicts?
Not necessarily. Like, in one sense, yes. In the other sense, like, what responsibility do I have to say, like, okay, you're a gambling addict, you shouldn't have this slot machine, right?
Exactly.
But there are regulations there, right? If you know someone's a gambling addict as a casino and you encourage their behavior, you're in some serious shit.
But you're asking about like an active or a passive role. If I know you're a gambling addict and I'm saying, hey, you're a gambling addict, here's a slot machine, like, that is problematic. But if I know you're a gambling addict and I have a stand that sells slot machines, it's your option to buy the slot machines.
Let's take a different analogy, because you're not wrong there, but let's take a different analogy. Let's look at tobacco.
Okay.
Right? And I read an article way back that said social media will be the new tobacco. This was like a decade or two ago. And wow, that was prescient. There was a wiki that was on Hacker News yesterday, this little wiki page on the history of social media as the new tobacco. And it really is, I mean, it's insane, but it's not inaccurate to say, if we got everyone, especially the teenagers, get off social media, here's a pack of cigarettes, light them up, it would actually overall drastically improve their health. They'd get more cancer.
You're going to need to describe
but they would have a lot better mental health. There's an increasing amount of studies that social media itself is extremely damaging to your mental health.
I'm just going to add a little bit of something here. I have to agree with Gavin.
Okay.
Just because, if, the whole marijuana, I'm just going to use that example, let's say they banned it in all states, right? People are still going to find a way to get marijuana somewhere else, either out of the country or, down low. But I think what you're saying is just like, why give them more if they're an addict already?
I guess what I'm getting at is theoretically, some stuff can be used responsibly, but there's some stuff like social media that, as we study this more and more, there is no responsible use of social media. It doesn't always go horribly wrong, but most of the time it goes horribly wrong. Just the way the human mind works, if you look at Dunbar's number and all this, like, it is not meant to be that connected to that many people. It just is not built for that.
Right.
And especially when you combine that with algorithms that are making everything fleeting and not building on a repository of knowledge. Like, I don't think you saw the same things in the old forums and the old BBSs, because there was a sense that you were building a large corpus of knowledge and it was a permanent thing and you were all working together. And also, it wasn't everyone. It was a small group that were all on the same page, that all shared context. And they're like, oh, we're really into, you know, whatever the topic was, whether it was sports, whether it was Star Wars, whether just whatever, right? You had this really focused community that were all on the same page. And social media is not that. Social media is trying to get everyone into the same conversation. So by its nature, there's just too much stuff. No one has context, which is why, you know, I'll use an example from me from social media.
Well, real quick before you do that, because there's two things that you're kind of dancing around that I think are important to address. So the first thing is going to be who's the authority that says whether or not you're allowed to gamble? Right? You're a gambling addict.
Okay.
Am I, like, as a second person or even as the builder of the gambling machines, am I responsible for telling you? Do I have authority to tell you that you should not gamble? Like, that's a philosophical question, right? Or should you be the one that makes that decision whether or not you...
To the other example, to tobacco, right? At this point, we've basically said tobacco, especially cigarettes, is just never good, is kind of the societal consensus at this point. So we're going to make it as hard as possible to sell this, short of fully outlawing it, because some people are still addicted, right? And they're going to fight like hell before they give that up. They'll have all the cancers before they give up a cigarette, right? But we've agreed that this is just a net negative on society, and that selling this was a mistake, that we should have never got this deep into putting cigarettes everywhere, advertising them all over the place. We consider this a mistake.
But say Joe likes it as like a luxury, a little luxury, right? And then we say, okay, we're not allowed to sell this anymore. Like, now I'm infringing on, like, his ability to enjoy that luxury just because you're a cigarette addict, right? So the philosophical question comes down to, who is the one that should say you're not allowed to smoke? Should it be you? Should it be me as a manufacturer? Or should it be somebody else who's looking at it at a high level and saying, like, all right, this is bad for everybody?
Now we're getting into politics.
No. It's a philosophical question.
It is.
But that's the part that you're dancing around.
It relates to libertarianism versus, you know, more controlled.
That's philosophy. That's a philosophical differences. Right.
But so I think, personally, my views on this are, well, exactly how damaging and to how many people.
More utilitarian.
So my thing, if, you know, no, I don't think we should try to make the world completely bubble wrapped. I think that leads to its own problems. So if you're going to let someone do something, if they understand the risks, and again, there's nuance there. Do they actually understand? Also, do they have a choice?
Am I actively hiding the risks?
Like if you're just stuck on the street, you have no money. Like, people always paint it as like, oh, why would you do that? Look, if the drug is the one thing that makes you happy and the rest of your life just sucks, that's a pretty logical decision to go do some drugs.
Right.
These people are not illogical. Like, this is the best thing that happens to them today. Of course they're going to do it, right? If you give them other options, they stop doing it. And we've seen that where you know, here's housing. Rather than clean up, we'll give you housing. It's like, no, here's housing. And then a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people clean up because now that's not the best part of their day anymore.
Right.
So anyway, if people are informed, if people are, you know, making that decision for themselves and it doesn't cause a lot of damage to other people, sure. You want to do that? Go ahead. I was just watching a video last night and a podcast interview with Johnny Knoxville and Steve-O, and it's just some of the stuff they've done. I can't believe those guys are still alive. Like,
oh, dude, especially Steve-O.
Crazy.
Yeah. So again, that's, most people don't do that kind of self-harm.
Right.
They built a whole career on just insane self-harm. So yeah, okay. You know, if you want to do that, I guess go for it. But I think that when you're looking at stuff like Replica, I think the potential for massive damage here, let's look at the national security implication.
Well, there is a large potential. But that kind of starts tying into like the second point that I wanted to bring up, because you were talking about social media and how social media, like if you replaced it with cigarettes, we would be healthier. Like one I would want to see how they're measuring health, because those metrics are important. But two, I spoke earlier about like Bowling Alone in Robert Putnam's book. That was in 2000, before social media, and we were having all of these implications. So it sounds like, at least to me, looking at the timeline of events, social media isn't the problem. Social media takes an existing problem and makes it go faster.
Yeah, I mean, well, so that's the thing. A lot of these things, at a minimum, they are accelerants.
Yes.
If they're not the cause, they are accelerants.
But that's why I have to be That's why I have to like raise an eyebrow at social media makes us unhealthy. It's like, is it social media that makes us unhealthy, or is it the fact that we're unhealthy and social media enables it? Because I think there is a blend.
I think it's both.
But for the most part, like, I think social media is probably fine. There's definitely a lot of things that we can do to tweak, and those conversations are being had by experts and politicians. But I don't think saying a blanket statement of social media makes us unhealthy is healthy, if that makes sense.
I'm going to disagree there. I think that, again, if you look at it from a systems theory standpoint, right, like, what is this thing designed to do?
Right.
I think conceivably, because like I said, look at the internet pre-social media, pre-algorithmic manipulation.
Well, you're talking about
have straight up chronological feeds, and you had small. I think the problem is whenever you try to get everyone in the room together, I think and we'll come back to this because I think this is what needs to happen for kind of the next stage of AI, is you need context. And that's the thing it doesn't have right now. And I was talking to David Knickerbocker about some interesting ideas on how to, he was trying to increase, efficiency. And I'm not going to share all that because it was kind of his own initial research. But like, I think context is what's missing. All the stuff in the entire model is dumped into this same kind of pile. And that leads to some major problems. And I think if models, because people, right, if I'm talking to my niece who's 14, I'm going to do that. Like, there's going to be a very different set of, conversations and concepts, and how even the same topic I'm going to cover differently than talking to you guys on this podcast right now. And if I was talking to a 6-year-old, again, very different way of communicating. Or again, if I'm talking to my parents, like there's a context, and you learn how to communicate with other people, not just the context of the conversation, but how you communicate with this person properly, given this background and this relationship,
which is all outside of social media.
Yeah. So I think that is what's missing. Right now I'm just focusing on where does AI need to go to really become more human? It needs to understand that context. But this, going back to everything in one pile in social media, there's a lack of context. And I had this incident where they had this article about this woman who was a beekeeper. She was doing really cool apiary stuff. And so all this amazing stuff. So I made a stupid joke, and I'm just like, I'd give her a B, right? It's a pun. Oh, and this other woman responded. She's like, oh, you just can't, men can't handle women doing good work. And I'm just like, B, it's a pun. Like, because again, social media, the structure of social media is to look very quickly, to not gain context, because there's just the fire hose. There's too much stuff for you to go look at every. This is like, was it Brandolini's law, the bullshit asymmetry principle? I can manufacture bullshit.
But you're not talking about the bullshit asymmetry principle. You're talking about somebody having a completely different understanding or a different takeaway from a joke that you
context, right?
Well, I wouldn't even necessarily call it lacking context.
One thing, and she didn't see the other part of it. She didn't see the context of the joke.
So even if she saw the context of the joke, she can take away the message completely differently, right? Like, two people can experience the exact same situation and have different interpretations of that situation. And so, like, this is all human psychology stuff. Again, stuff that exists outside of social media, and then social media, as you said, is an accelerant. And so I think when it comes to social media, because a lot of times people think like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, those have algorithms behind them. Because in the past, right, we had 4chan. 4chan, like, it doesn't have algorithms behind it. You have to scroll down to find the thing that you're looking for.
Yeah, /.4chan,
right.
Reddit, all those.
Reddit does a really good job of that because it's not powered by algorithms. Reddit allows you to create your own little rooms. But even then...
But Reddit has subreddits, right? It has context.
And that's where I was going. Well, outside of the context, I'll say, ignoring the context for a second, Reddit allows you to create your own information... bubbles and echo chambers. And that's what's really getting a lot of people. Again, that's outside of social media. It's just an accelerant of things that we're already doing.
True. But I think because I find myself also, it steers you into posting dumber, shorter stuff. Like I've just stopped. I used to post really lengthy things, well-researched with lots of links, but no one reads them because it's social media, right? Like on LinkedIn even, which is,
But that's not a problem. That's not a social media problem.
Right.
That is a human problem.
human
And that's what I keep
No,
getting
it's
back to is it's
no,
all,
no, it's
these are
McLuhan.
all human problems.
It's Marshall McLuhan, right? The medium is the message, right? How you get that message across
Right.
when you're constrained to 160 characters, like Twitter used to be, is very different than if you're emailing it versus a phone call.
Right.
Right? The
Right.
medium is the message. And
Right.
the medium of social media is it's all about engagement, which is usually the best way to do that is outrage. It's a fire hose of stuff to keep you clicking and keep you watching. Not what just normally comes across, oh, it's a slow news day, right? It's just whatever, right? Whatever we can do to keep you here watching more ads.
Right. Again, a human problem, because you look at like the U.S. history, the last like 4 out of the 6 wars that we were in, we lied to get into. So this is my point in all of this is these are human problems. Social media accelerates them, but I don't think social media necessarily makes them worse.
Okay, guys,
okay.
I think we should start wrapping up. Yeah, I can see you guys have two
Do you want
views.
to do any more? Like, how much time do we have? Because I think we can throw in briefly.
I can wrap up
regulation.
with AI ethics.
Yeah, ethics and regulation.
We can do that. Yeah, I think we have like what 10 minutes left.
Well,
That'll-
just
that'll do it. I
like
think that'll
the
do it.
ethics part to kind of cap off the social media bit, because you're right. Like we should be considering a lot of these things. When you look at certain social media platforms, they have algorithms that push certain types of content. Facebook got sued for pushing like hateful content at one point or self-harm content. And so when we're looking at artificial intelligence, it's taking these ideas and figuring out, okay, how do we want to steer or align our AI systems? So really good example would be, do we want our AI systems to lead people down a certain path of thinking or taking certain actions? And we can do that.
That's what marketers and advertisers are going to be all over that.
And we
so.
can tell our AI systems to do that. And this gets into bias. One of the things that I usually talk about when it comes to bias and ethics is when you look at some of the implicit bias that we have in our society, do we take that at face value and say, okay, this is how we've always done it, let's throw it into an AI system? Because that can become dangerous, right?
Well,
so if we look at our data sets, right, like facial recognition
it's
data
leak in
sets,
despite your best efforts to keep it out, right?
right? If we look at facial recognition data sets, and we have some of the academic data sets, they have like 98%, like not 98%, but like a high percentage, a ridiculously high percentage of like white people, but then they don't have a lot of Asians or blacks, and so that we build a system, a facial recognition algorithm, and then it becomes black people can't unlock their like phone because there wasn't enough of them representative in the data set to, oh my god, right?
Or again, Apple's Face ID when they first released it,
and that's
any Asian face would unlock it if you were Asian,
right? And that starts playing into this idea of like we're taking things in society and we're not thinking critically about how we integrate them into these algorithms. So then it quickly becomes like, I'm not racist, the machine told me to do it.
Yeah, it's math washing.
Right. It is a form of math washing.
It's math. It can't be biased. No, it's encoded bias.
But that's where we need to pay attention, like when we're building these systems, looking at the alignment and making sure that we have representative sample sets and we're doing statistics from like the base level and then building up from there and not taking like stuff that we do today.
Now, I do want to cover, because I think this is something that's getting ignored, right?
Well, we're going to wrap up, so.
Okay. So they just, we'll cover this briefly, but they just had a big thing about the president had all these companies come in and they're going to sign on to these voluntary ethics, standards. And it's like, that's great, but it's meaningless because we as a global society will have to be able to withstand the worst threats that AI can hit us with, right? Because unlike building nuclear weapons, That's pretty complicated. Getting those high-speed centrifuges is pretty hard. It's pretty easy to control those, right? Like, it's hard. Even if you actually have the knowledge, which is really complicated on how to build a nuclear bomb, it's still really hard and stupidly expensive to do. But AI is not, right? Like you were saying, what, 1956 when the perceptron research was out there?
Yeah.
So the research comes from the 1950s, and we've already open sourced a ton of these models. And even if we hadn't, right, going and looking up how to build one of these, there's tons of papers going back more than half a century on how to do this. Yeah. So you could always build another one. The training data sets, there's a lot of those that are already open source. And even if those weren't open source, you make Face App. Wasn't that the one that aged you with AI? And everyone's just dumping their pictures in without looking at the terms of service. And you're like, guys, I wouldn't do that. And they had millions and millions of people just took pictures of themselves. So like you just make a trendy little app and snag whatever info you want. So like, we will not be able to have non-proliferation treaties. We will see the same thing we've seen with ransomware, where you just set up in a jurisdiction without an extradition treaty, and just, if there's money to be made using AI to manipulate people, people will do this. And unless we're willing to start taking military action and doing like kinetic strikes and blowing up these buildings and data centers that are causing this problem, which again, there's good reasons not to do that. Like, right there, if we could drastically reduce the amount of calls, scam calls coming into America, if we blew up a few key office buildings in India, but we'd probably risk, starting a major war. So not really worth it. Yeah. So once you have that jurisdictional protection where one jurisdiction just doesn't give a crap, or they're like, hey, this is making good money, why would we stop it, right? Then that will happen. There will always be rogue actors that will be using this. It's so easy to make that even if all the companies somehow magically totally adhere to the best ethics standards with these voluntary controls, even if that's true, which I guarantee you it's not going to be, it doesn't matter, because the threat will still be out there. And the problem with AI is it scales. You don't need an office building full of people doing romance scams and making all these calls, right? You can have a data center, or you could not have a data center, or you could hijack other people's computers and just use a botnet so your cost is zero, right? And you can mount this against whatever country you want to be your target. And I'll finish my thought, the last thing with Replica, right? They turned off the ERP stuff overnight.
Oh, people freaked out when that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard about that.
That is a very powerful.
My bot's soulless. It's not acting the same.
Yeah.
And
they
received a lot of complaints from that.
And they didn't just turn it off. They changed it completely.
Yeah. They reverted back to it though.
Yeah.
Because they got so much.
But that ability, that is a warning sign, right? That ability to take a huge number of people and just plunge them into a very dark mental place instantly, right? Or like the other guy who committed suicide, and then there was another guy who got arrested in England who had machetes. He wanted to go assassinate the Queen because an AI, again, one of these replica type things, told him, oh, you should go kill the Queen. And so he tried to. This is really radicalization and terrorism. Like, the national security implications of AI are terrifying.
Stochastic terrorism.
But
is what
that's
it's
what I was talking about earlier when I said, how much can politics play with this?
I think we got to wrap up, because that turns into a whole other
next episode.
Like, there's already 3 things I want to comment on, like Elio's thing.
I guess we can hold on to those for next time.
Yeah.
But is there any last minute thoughts you guys have?
That was it. You got any more?
No, just to wrap up, in the interest of wrapping up.
Look how hard you're sitting on your hands. He's trying so hard.
There's three like major things that you brought up that I want to address, and I can't do that in a short amount of time, because everything you were talking about is like, oh, well, we can do this at scale, or this is really dangerous, or all this stuff. Like, I used to think that. I don't have that same level of concern anymore. And to explain why I don't have that same level of concern anymore is going to take a little bit.
Okay. I am really curious.
It is a problem.
I'm looking forward to it.
But it's not the same kind of problem that you're probably thinking of.
Okay. Interesting.
How about you write those down on the Google Doc?
Piqued my interest.
We do have a Google Doc.
That's why. Yeah. And then we can save that for next time.
All right.
But thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
You guys had a lot of great insights, and every time you guys come, I learn something new. You got to remember, I'm learning everything. Going to college and everything you guys are talking about is something I'm learning as well. So, But thank you guys.